Brennan.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Councillor Brennan. I'm Councillor for Muswell Hill.
Thank you. Ali, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ali. I'm a co-optee member of the panel.
Thank you very much. Helena.
Yes, my name is Helena Khania. I'm also a co-optee.
Hello, I'm Councillor Ty Haran. I'm the member for Woodside.
Everyone, I'm Councillor Yanis for Tottenham Hale.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Sheila Peacock from South Tottenham. Communities and housing support.
Hi, I'm Beverly Tarker, Director Adults, Health and Communities.
Hello everyone, Councillor Lucia Desnev, I'm current member from Health Social Care and Wellbeing.
Good evening everybody, I'm Vicky Murphy, Interim Assistant Director for Adult Social Care.
And just be aware, we've got some residents with us this evening. We'll come to you, we'll just go through the business and the minutes, etc. And then we'll come to you and I'll ask you to introduce yourselves and you know, while we're here tonight. Thank you. So there's the first notice is obviously around filming at meetings. So just please note this meeting will be filmed or recorded by the council for live or subsequent broadcasts, and the rest of the information is in the pack. But by entering the meeting room and using the public seating areas, you're consenting to being filmed and to possibly use these images and sound recordings. And the chair has the discretion to terminate or suspend filming if it's necessary. Second, apologies for absence, Dominic.
Hi, yes, apologies received from Councillor Bella, who's in corporate committee on the chair of the meeting flash, and Councillor Pokie.
Any items of urgent business?
And
Any declarations of interest? Was mentioned that my sister's a GP in Tottenham and I'm a member of the RCN. Blankets declaration. Have we got any deputations, petitions or presentations? Okay. Thank you. So we'll move straight on to the minutes on pages 1 to 8.
Declaration, sorry. Do I have to declare my wife works in finance? Declaration.
Usually, I would have thought so, Dominic. I mean, it's wife works at stands. No,
I wouldn't think so. Well, not like that.
said it, so that's
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, so minutes. So there was a lot that went on the last meeting we had, and so there was a lot of action points to come from that. We've got the track now in front of us. So there was one of the items on the tracker around the finance and performance briefings to be set up following the updates from today's meeting on the 15th. Population health outcome framework to be included. Date for this meeting. So Dominic, are we doing dates for the finance and performance briefings and the risk?
I've been in touch with Sean about that today, so we'll basically time them after the cabinet meetings for those, for 2, 3 and 4.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we've got further actions. We've got adults and health. We had 2 reports that we finished in March, one in sheltered housing and one predominantly around co-production. Can I just check with you, Dominic, do we know when these reports will be coming to Cabinet?
I believe that's in November.
November, excellent. Okay, thank you. So in appendix, so we've also got some updates that we have got appendix A and appendix B attachments provided. So we've got a written response providing concerns about people with very high needs being placed in sheltered housing schemes alongside older residents. So I really appreciated the response. That was really helpful. I think one of the questions that, and I can't remember which councillor raised it at the time, but I think it was particularly around those with high needs and the care that actually is given within the sheltered housing. So I just requested that could be an additional part, and that could just be added to that response. That would be really helpful. Thank you. And on appendix B, we've got Canning Crescent, and there was mention of a lease to ensure the lease is in place between the council and Barney having a health trust. Just a quick question around the lease. around whether it sounds like the lease is going to be agreed. Just, is that a problem or is that something that's just going to be, Jill, you're nodding something to you?
That's just, it's in progress and everything's going well. It's just a normal part of development, how the tenants of the building occupy it and how the share space.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm sure it was something that I was. Thank you. And then refugee and migrants in section A, following up on legal issues of the people with no recourse to public funds. It's really interesting because at this point, the hospital trust, we were discussing around hospital trusts, and they advised the only way to collate data on this would be to contact each of the local hospitals separately. And it says we've approached them with this request. I'm just checking, is there an outcome from that request, or is this an ongoing? It's alive.
It's a live process, so we've submitted in essence, otherwise the hospitals trust their information and they, some of them have contacted directly where we know well and.
Thank you. Okay, so we look forward to that. And then the so on B was ensure the inclusion health group reports into integrated care partnership. So it says the recent inclusion health needs assessment has been conducted by the NCL boroughs, which is expected to shape commissioning of policy and practice. Is this a need health needs assessment that's going to be made in public, or is this just for commissioning purposes?
At the moment, it hasn't been published, and there was another phase of the. I think it's so.
Excellent, thank you, Jill. Okay, great. So that's the minutes. I'm just going to check with my fellow councillors. Was there anything from the minutes?
Yes.
Peacock.
On page 7, I raised about the issue of violence against men. And you commented that an LGBT, RDVA, independent person was going to be recruited. Has that happened?
Yes, we have recruited the Beatrice Okafor that are a specialist LGBT organisation to deliver that information. That's recently started. That's using protocol. I think. Thanks.
For that, I'd be interested because you said that obviously most of the violence is men against other men. I'm not experienced myself, but it's women against men in the parental home. That's an area of concern.
At the moment, we're looking into our commissioning plans around particularly girls and domestic abuse.
There was one that was that co-opted and there's a representative of Harrogate over 50s on the 18 World Partnership Board. And I said that there were other pensioners groups, but I've not been approached. And I run the biggest pensioners group in the whole of London. And certainly we've never been approached. I just wondered, is there action at the end of that?
I thought we had an update to say you have been approached.
Yeah.
I misread that.
No.
Okay. Well, if somebody could get in touch then and sort of sort that out. Is that okay? I'm looking to somebody. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Beth.
That's a very important thing.
That's brilliant.
Just to say that, yes, it struck me that the Hornsey and Wood Green Pensioners Group hasn't been contacted. Janet Shapiro, I think, is the organiser of that one. So I think they should be contacted too.
Thanks. Thank you for all this useful information. It's really good. Okay. So are there anything?
I think that's something that was already.
We've already said, okay.
No, thank you.
Okay, right, thank you very much. So that's the minutes. So we go on to the first main item on the agenda, which is the major adaptations, which is these adaptations. It says in the report to follow. So it's in the supplementary if anyone's interested and going to be looking at where that is. So that's in the supplementary papers. We've been incredibly lucky today because obviously as a scrutiny committee, it's great to hear from our residents who experience the services that we scrutinise and look at. We've got Mr. Leveson with her husband. We've got Beatrice Okafor on the Teams call. So the rationale for asking people along today was just for you to help us in understanding the issues that are happening. Obviously, because this has been broadcast, we cannot give any personal information, so we won't be mentioning sort of, you know, anything specific or any diagnoses or anything that can be sort of, you know, more of a personal nature, shall we say. And this isn't, as I think we've been really clear, this isn't a complaints process, and we haven't got any powers to resolve anything, but we are a scrutiny committee, and so anything that you sort of give us some information on will be helpful to us as a panel, really to just get a broader understanding of your lived experience around getting the aids and adaptation services. So with that in mind, you'll be called expert witnesses tonight. You're not here as deputies. You're here just to give a minute or two, very brief, the issues that you have experienced, and maybe some thoughts about how this could be. We could be looking at this as a scrutiny committee, and if you've got any ideas about sort of how this could be improved, that's always really helpful. So I'm going to ask. So we've got Mrs. Everson in the room, and so I'll ask her to start, and then we've got Beatrice, and then we've got Lords. So if you'd like to give us a couple of minutes each. And then we can always ask you to come back in and have that conversation as the agenda item progresses. But then we've got the officers' report. The officers will speak to us, and then as a panel, we'll sort of scrutinise. We'll ask questions. Okay. So and obviously we may be asking, you know, you questions, or you can put your hand up if you want to contribute at that point. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Anderson if you could sort of give us a couple of minutes. No more than that possible, it's really difficult, but a couple of minutes, and just sort of give us an understanding of aids and adaptations from your perspective.
So, as you know, explained, we've all spoken, we're aware of each other. We had 2 LGO complaints against the local authority that have been in our favour, and one of them was of sufficient degree of severity that the Ombudsman released a report that needed to be discussed in public. So if I do quickly both of them, the first one being around home adaptations, and Brian will chime in. So that I would say the issues there are, we were strongly encouraged not to have all the adaptations that we needed, and this is despite next door not having another adaptation to her back garden, another grant. We don't understand why we went around the full use of our grant, and we showed you the impact of that in terms of us not having the funds everywhere that we need them. And we experienced quite serious hostility from staff members when, you know, we explained to you earlier about my mother's death and the conduct of the officer around that, which made us reticent to engage. There was the issue where, I mean, I'm going to be honest, Brian asked for a deeper bath because Zach was splashing all over the place. The adaptation still hadn't been completed. I thought, don't do that, Brian. You know, that will be used to delay the process. Sure enough, it was. We don't need that. Just to move the process on. What else? The poor communication, I think, is also an issue. And the adaptations still aren't completed. And it was only in August, we got the last payment for a mobile bus that we'd ordered, but we put the claim in for that
Some time before.
And the delay now is that when they came round at Easter, I've still not had the email that I was promised afterwards, setting out what would happen afterwards from the guy who became the contractor. And what he'd done is he'd looked at all the other properties. When we'd gone through the LGO complaint, he sort of said, we don't know. And I should also explain I had a degree in civil engineering, did some civil engineering at one point. I said, I don't understand how they didn't look at the plans and not know that this gap in the ceiling was going to be an issue. He said, neither do I. I knew it from all the other properties. And so that was challenged with the LGO, and the LGO accepted the council's explanation. I still don't. And from what the other contractors said, that's just reinforced my view that this is something that could be read off plans or could have been investigated a little bit more thoroughly. The situation we're in now, and I think one of the ADCs for housing, is that we've been housed by Haringey, and we had a flood in November last year. The toilet was flooded. And we phoned the Housing Association, who are a specialist housing association for people with disabilities, and they were supportive. And the conversation went, can you send me a video, Mrs. Leveson? Can you do that? Can you? Can you not do that? You're not capable, Mrs. Leveson. Can you not send video to Mrs. Leveson? So I put the video online of the toilet spilling all over the place. It continued to spill for the best part of a week. Not great when you're diabetic. And eventually we called our own plumber. That cost £650. Then their plumber turned up from Nottingham. We live in Tottenham. We don't know why. We then said, if we don't act on this, we phoned our insurance company. We followed all the advice given. We will then escalate to a solicitor. We escalated to a solicitor, and that's been ongoing since about December last year. And they've not responded to one single solicitor letter. And so we are now in the process of, it's been delayed because the Queen's died, the post held up, filing papers, court papers. So that's what's delayed the very last part of these adaptions. So that's one part, and then the other part is with this bed. Now, this is another decision that the LGO made in our favour, and we've always had this problem. The problem is with Zach, the way Zach is, he has uncontrolled movements. So when he's in bed, he needs these metal cot sides. He needs metal cot sides because he can't get his head stuck in the railings. If he does, he'll choke to death. So this is a very serious risk patient safety issue. But because he kicks and kicks and kicks and kicks, he kicks and he breaks the mesh cot side. So what we've done now is we've padded the wall. We did have a mattress against the wall, but we've padded the wall to lessen the impact. But what we found is that we are able to order through Mediquip's own commercial arm, and I talked to you earlier about all these things seem to be linked together, to get this mesh railing quicker to us. Now, the risk that I feel comes from the deaths that I read. The death about, there's a guy in Southend who died, and his head got stuck in railing, and there was a young 10-year-old in Blackpool who died, and that family were in the same position. They were constantly saying this is an issue, this is an issue, this is an issue, and that it was never replaced. And it was the Health and Safety Executive that reported back on that. And so what bothers me is when you've got a situation where it's actually, it's not that you can't use the equipment, you have to use the equipment because there's no option but to use the equipment. And we make one in repairs because you can do quite a lot with duct tape and gorilla tape. There is no break in the system that allows for something that is really life-threateningly dangerous to be addressed with the appropriate speed. So how many ambulances have we called this year? 4. And normally when we call for an ambulance, we're category 1. And that means that you've got to get an ambulance within 7 minutes. And we get an ambulance within 7 minutes because that's the degree of severity. There are 4 degrees of severity for ambulances. But there just seems to be a blanket system that isn't capable of recognising risk and danger to life and respond to that.
I'm going to stop you there. Thank you very much. That was really helpful. I'm just going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask the others when they've spoken to us. So based on your experiences, because obviously as a scrutiny committee, we're looking sort of, backwards but forwards as well. Is there something, what would be a thing that you would sort of want us as a panel to sort of really be cognizant of about, recommendations, or, how would you want the service to improve? Is there one thing that you could think that would make a big difference? Because it's really helpful to get.
So in terms of the relationship with Mediquip, so we're the clients of the adult services, we're not Mediquip's clients. It's usually left to us to chase it up with Mediquip. There doesn't seem to have been a process. Now, we've not ordered anything since the outcome of the complaint, and things were meant to be put in place. It's nice to get the reassurance that those things are in place. That if something goes wrong, that there's some understanding of if there's a delay in equipment, because it's apparently a special order, even though, as Mrs. Leveson said, it can be ordered from the commercial arm within 3 days, not through Mediquip itself, even though it's the same business. That maybe there's alternatives available. That somebody recognises which is what Mrs. Leveson is saying, recognises the seriousness of the need for that equipment. So that's on the relationship with Mediquip.
I mean, one of the things that has happened is when we've had the same guys over again come to our house, is where these mesh up in pairs, and they've said, leave one on the bed for you, Mr. Benson. And so that's been really helpful. And so rather than having a just-in-time system, because just-in-time's too late when it's life-threatening, just-in-time system is you've got one under the bed ready, and then you've got to replace it, and it'll go the one. It's the same with oxygen masks. You know, you don't want one oxygen mask, you want two, one for when that one's broken.
And then on the adaptation side,
Yeah.
you know, the kind of the message from us that comes out of this is around the transparency of the grant system. You know, whose grant is it?
Well, it's our hands.
So, you know, it very much was a case of things were being done to us. That what was being brought in, what equipment, how that equipment sits, and we've still got to live in that plant. You know, but what the equipment is when the work is being done. You know, the work is incredibly noisy because they're drilling into concrete. So we needed to move out to allow that work to be done, which puts a delay. We don't want to be blamed for that delay, but effectively that was one of the things that was happening. You know, trying to schedule it around holidays.
Because when next door had their elections, we couldn't stay in our house because the noise was so much. So Zach has those triggers for seizures. He's been one.
Not really.
No,
again, sorry.
but this noise can be one as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think we've got really good understanding actually, and thank you very much for coming in this evening to talk to us about this and give your perspective on it. That's really helpful. We've made some notes, and I think we'll be using that as part of what we're talking to us about later. But I've also got Beatrice. So Beatrice, could you introduce yourself? Again, if you could keep it to the points around and talk more general rather than specific, and try and, if possible, not, you know, sort of give medical information, because this is going out and being live streamed. So thank you. Beatrice, over to you.
Good evening. My name is Beatrice Okafor. I'm a Haringey resident. Hello.
Beatrice,
Yeah.
you want to just give us a little bit about your experiences?
My experience is that I have cancer, liposarcoma, which I had an operation nearly 4 years ago. I had a tumor about 2.5 kilos removed. So that rendered me that at the moment I'm bedbound. And the hospital arranged everything with Haringey about the ramp, the toilet, and everything before they discharged me, because I had 4 major operations in 4 weeks. That's how bad it was. And by the time I got home, I had the hospital bed put in downstairs. That was all right. But Haringey came here, they measured the toilet. I have a small store downstairs for the toilet, and there's pipe already there. It's just to put the toilet. So they came, they measured it, measure the ramp, the garden, because I have 2 steps going down, and the front door as well. And I never see Haringey again. I started calling, we started calling. My daughter will go to the library to arrange, come down. Eventually, they sent another set. Up to now, it was 4 times they came and measured. And that measurement never resulted to anything. And it's now 2 weeks ago, they now started the job. And the toilet and the bathroom, they removed the shower, brought, I don't know what type of contractor. They came, did the job, changed the shower. And as I was saying, the toilet and the bathroom was so bad. Nobody came to check it, whether the job. We called them the same day they finished to come, because the job was so shoddy, to come and check it, an inspector to come and check it. Nobody came. The water at one time was leaking. I was downstairs, the carer came in the morning and went. And you can imagine where I was sitting of my seat downstairs. The water was pouring from upstairs to me, and I couldn't move because I cannot move without somebody helping. So I was there with all this water on me pouring. I had to call my daughter, who was at work, to leave work right from the city to come home, and then start the towel. We called them eventually at night around 2 from afternoon. They sent an emergency who now came around 2 at night to stop the water. Eventually they came, but the job wasn't done proper the following day. The same thing continued. The water was actually going into the electric meter. They came and stopped it. The last one they came was 5 months ago, and they put all the sellotape with a black bag in the bathroom. And with my own type of cancer, I have where the tumor was removed. I had a dent inside it that you need cleaning every day, shower to clean it. Now we had to use hot water every day to use face towel to clean it, which means infection. So for 4 years, I haven't been to my garden or anywhere. The only time I go out was when ambulance come to take me to hospital and bring me back, because I couldn't go out, no ramp. So I was cooked inside here up to today. This summer passed me again, because up to now they haven't finished the one they started. For 3 days or 4 days now, they haven't been. They said, oh, we order this, we order that. And that's because I have to go through the, what do you call it, the adult social services. Even my doctor, the people there were calling for Haringey to do something, but nothing happened. Adult social services had to get involved in that matter. The toilet here they're supposed to put is still up to now. Nobody ever talk about it. And I've got the store next to my bed for them to fix it. The toilet is only the ones that came for the ramp that now fix the toilet. You see?
Thank you.
So for 4 years, this I'm still here, not going out.
Okay, thank you. You've given us a really, really vivid description of your experiences. Is there anything that you would like to say to us as a committee about what would be the, if you could think of one thing that would really change your experience and improve it, what would you like to say to us today?
Communication.
Thank you.
Communication. And don't abandon people, because they just abandon you and not bothering. And that's part of that communication. Communicate. The fence fell down. For a year and a half, my back fence was fell down and nobody came. The whole fence from beginning to end. Folks were making mints out of the place.
Beatrice, thank you very much. That's been really helpful. That's really helpful that you've spoken to us this evening. I'm going to pause you there just so I can bring in Lords, because again, I'd like to get something from Lords about the experiences that she's had. Again, Lords, if you can, maybe not about anything medical or anything that's sort of, difficult, if you, give names to other than yourself, obviously, that's in the meeting today, just because this is being live streamed. But yeah, over to you for you to give us a brief description of the issues and then an understanding how that could be, improved for yourself in that experience.
Well, I'm Lourdes Kiva and I'm here tonight in my role as carer. My aunt is 93 and although she was assessed for an adult social care package, she didn't want carers coming in. So there's 3 of us that look after her, myself and 2 of my cousins, her daughters. And months and months and months ago, at the beginning of the year, one of my cousins got an injury to her shoulder as a result of pushing my aunt in a wheelchair that we bought. We bought it because she needed a wheelchair, and it was thought by my cousin's doctor and a district nurse was involved with my aunt to be inappropriate. So a referral was made for a wheelchair. Well, we heard nothing for a very long time, and I've left this to my 2 cousins because I'm very, very different, and usually up to now, anything to do with my aunt and the local authority, usually I deal with it, but I left this to my 2 cousins. They then, I got them to phone up again, and then her measurements were asked. Well, the measurements were given, and we heard again nothing more. So then I got them to phone again. And we were then asked, we were told that somebody would come around and measure her. And this happened, again, months ago, and we still haven't heard. So now really the situation is there's still no wheelchair. We've been waiting for months for this wheelchair. And the thing is that it will now come back to me because I'll be putting in a formal complaint. My cousins do not do things like that. They don't understand the process of the local authority. But the only way, because I've cared for so many people now, the only way I've achieved anything in Haringey is by putting in formal complaints and going to councillors. And this is what I'm going to have to do, even though I think it's wrong that I have to do that, because it takes away the power and the empowerment of my cousins. So it comes back to me to sort this out, and I'll be doing that this week, or next week, really. Now, you ask for improvement. Basically, my aunt has had the most wonderful care from district nurses. They're so professional. They come in, they assess. I was a part of that process. They left their files, they explained the files in detail to me. They explained the assessment process in detail. So when something went wrong last week, I know exactly where I had to phone, who I had to speak to. The files are there, the notes are there, etc. We've got nothing from adaptations, nothing. We've got a phone number. We haven't been given any sort of information about the process, what happens after the assessment. Because the assessment, like I said, people actually came out to measure my aunt. And again, that was months ago. And there's still no wheelchair. She's 93. So in some ways, yes, we accept that we, bought the wrong chair. It would have been a lot simpler if somebody just advised us about what chair to buy, and then we could have got on with it. But she's without a wheelchair for months now, and we've been waiting for this. So that's my sort of, side of the story. The 2 things that I want to sort of, is the fact is the lack of information, the lack of a process being identified, and also the lack of, it's different for someone like me who's been involved with the local authority. I was qualified as a social worker a very long time ago. I know the processes, but my cousins do not. And they've really struggled with this. And I just think that there must be many more like them in the borough than somebody like me. And I think it is wrong that people have to then follow through on a formal complaint, which possibly will not achieve that much either. But I think that is what I want to say tonight. It's months and months and months, waiting for a wheelchair when, nothing has arrived. And it'd be interesting to see what will happen.
Thoughts? Thank you ever so much. You've been very clear, and you helpfully included the ask that I asked you to do, which was what would you like to see improvement, and your link to district nurses and the package around the process and the information and the files, I think is very helpful for us as councillors. I'm going to stop that part now, and I'm going to go over, because we've got an officer report in the pack. It's under the title Major Adaptations. It's in the supplementary pack, and we've got officers here to speak to the reports tonight. And I think hopefully they're going to go through some of the issues that I think you probably, all three of you may have highlighted anyway, and a way forward that is going to be looked at as part of this report. So I'm looking at Vicky, is this correct? Excellent. Vicky, would you like to introduce the report? And you can just sort of very briefly give us the highlights, obviously, because we would like some time to have some questions for yourself, and then some recommendations from us as a panel. So over to you, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just go through. So there has been an improvement plan that's been in place for over a year now, our DFGs and equipment. And I just want to talk through the lengthy process and the improvements that we've made. So it was identified that during COVID, in the last couple of years, there's been some delays in the process as a result of further recruitment into post. And we've also started designing a system in Liquid Logic so that we can manage the steps through there. So I'll talk you through some of the new stats that we've got, and then I'll go through some of the complaints that we received. So stage by stage comparative to last year for this year, awaited occupational OT assessments, it's gone up slightly from 44 to 66, but current open cases have gone from 189 to 174. But transferred to major adaptation teams and awaiting allocation to a surveyor is only at 70. So we've put some processes in place to ensure and brought in some external support to move referrals through the system quicker. Now, that is a very complicated step process from referral right to the adaptations being done. And I will go through some of the concerns that I picked up during our residents' feedback and talk through how we may be able to support that further. So works waiting to start gone from 48 to 108. Completed works in Q1 29 to 64, and work surveyed and ongoing to dynamic purchasing system from 91 to 431. That's a massive jump from where we were putting through the system. So we've also had an increase in OTs, as nationally there is a shortage of OTs and OT assistants. So we've started an apprenticeship. We have one apprenticeship at the moment going through. We've just recruited 2 OT assistants, and we are working with agencies to get more OTs in as well. We've also just interviewed for 2 surveyors to bring them on board as well, and we've used some external support. So there is lots of work still to do, but we have been on a journey. I just want to go through.
That's on page 17 for anyone who wants to follow it in the pack. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, carry on.
So I just want to go through some of the areas that I picked up, if that's okay, before
Yeah,
I go to questions, so that I can ensure, Chair, that I've captured them correctly. So the relationship with Medigroup seems to be a concern this evening, and that's something that we will look into, and delays in equipment. There was also mention about communications. That came from 2 or 3 people around communications, and what I also picked up is officers potentially being hostile. So I'd like to review that as well. Reviewing work and explanation of process has come through this evening. Now, it is step 11 in our from 1 to 11 step is about the surveyor and the OT system going back out. I would like opportunity to review why that hasn't happened in these cases, and I would be happy to come back and feed that back in. So also about equipment and delays and not being preventative in respect to delivering more than we potentially need when we know it's an ongoing need. But the ramp equipment adult social care not getting there quick enough, so the delays in the system, and don't abandon us. That was a very strong word, don't abandon us. So it's around that communication towards the end of it and continuing communication. And as well as answering questions now, it'd be really, really great if I could get the details so that I could review the work and potentially have a look at where we've gone wrong so we can do further learning.
Well, thank you, Becky, because we were very clear with the people coming on this evening. This is very difficult. It's not specifically about addressing individual things. So those yes, those do highlight the issues. I'm sure people will be very happy to give you their details afterwards. We'll do that afterwards offline. But thank you. So thank you for that quick run through, and we do appreciate that. So we're getting to councillors now. To ask questions about the reports, and if there's anything specifically they wanted. So we just have to ask councillors first. Can we ask questions? Yeah, and then I'll go with you, absolutely. But yes, we'll go through the councillors first on the scrutiny panel. So I'm just looking, Dominic, you help me if Councillor Brennan or Ali are raising their hands. Okay, okay, excellent. Helena, would you like to ask a question on this?
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. I just wanted to clarify. Number one was if somebody who has adaptation, etc., can they contact you outside normal office hours? Because from my experience, and I have had adaptations, it's actually quite difficult to get hold of somebody. And I'd like to understand where that's going. The other thing is, do you allocate a named person to each person and a substitute? Because it's so much easier if you have continuity as a resident, rather than dealing with a different person each time and having to explain the same story again and again. So those are the two things I'd quite like to understand.
Yes, so out of hours, I imagine comes through our housing department, and that would depend on what type of house or where you are residing. So that's out of hours, that's the offer to the housing department. There'll be an emergency number. And when we go back to the second question.
Sorry, the first one. So if you're in private accommodation, you've got no, it's got to be council accommodation, and you say it's the housing.
If you're in private accommodation, it would be the landlord. So it depends on what it is that you need. So for example, if the toilet broke and you was in camp, it would be the out of hours for adaptations or for repairs. That's I've got that.
Yes, no, absolutely. I was just going to check whether you meant the care concern or sort of.
I think it's both actually.
Yeah. So we have an out of hours duty social work team.
Yeah. Yes.
As you'll be well aware. Well, they should be there, you know, after hours, and you know that's well established. But just in terms of ensuring people are kept safe, pending when you know the repairs can actually be enacted. So you've got the sort of out of hours for the housing, sort of physical infrastructure. In terms of care, you've got the social work duty out of hours. 8489 1400.
I'm sorry, I'll just say that's I take it on a website somewhere.
Oh, sorry, it's on the website. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, so Dominic.
Sorry,
Councillor Brennan has a hand up.
So you're just going to answer the second question?
Yeah. So the second question, sorry, can you repeat the question again? Sorry. I'm a very listed person. I've got lots of
it was about whether you have a named person for each resident and whether, you know, it's about the continuity.
Okay, so when somebody puts a referral on the system, on the SAP system, once that's allocated, there is an allocated worker. And it goes through, as it goes through each step, that could change. So it may go to a surveyor because that is outsourced and that surveyor is coming to your property and working with you, but then that comes back in. So you will always, at the point of a referral, you are always going to have an open case on our system, but you may have a different allocated worker depending on what step you are.
Okay. Interesting to hear from the residents how they found that. Sorry.
Then hand up, apologies, and then we go to Councillor Karen and then Councillor Yanis. I'm pronouncing this correct as well. Okay. So Councillor Brennan.
Hi. I looked at the report and you have spoken about the lack of surveyors, lack of staff basically. And I was just interested because I think you said you had one apprentice, was it occupational therapist? Is that right? And maybe one apprentice surveyor. So am I to understand that all the surveyors are currently outsourced and there are no in-house surveyors?
So we do have some in-house surveyors. I haven't got the number where I can. It's on here, very small. I'll try and drill down on it in a minute if anybody can get online. But we've just recruited to 2 surveyors. So, and we also outsource some work as well. So
Right.
Should I just put it in there, because it is on slide 15. There are in the major adaptations team, there are 5 surveyors. These are all in-house.
They are there.
Sorry?
So sorry, because there were no names on them, I did wonder whether they were actually posts that hadn't been filled, but it's just that you didn't have time to put the names on the posts.
Well, we wouldn't put the names on the posts generally.
Okay, so they're in-house, they are there.
We'll just illustrate the sort of the strength of the team in terms of numbers. I think it's fair to say that as part of our review and sort of benchmarking, looking elsewhere, we kind of recognise that other areas do have enhanced sort of complements or staff within their team. So that's an area we're actually looking into.
Yes.
At least because of the signal backlog.
That was one of my questions, literally, was that you'd said you'd benchmarked it and compared with others, and it wasn't clear whether you were better or worse than the other systems. So that's what you've found. It seems obvious that you're a bit understaffed. The whole area has trouble with staffing, and that this is what's causing a lot of problems for the team. Would you say that's correct?
I think that's a fair reflection. I think the other sort of challenge to note that there are workforce challenges in terms of actually attracting qualified surveyors to actually work in-house. And that's why Vicky sort of highlighted the fact that we're actually training sort of assistant OTs and training apprentices, because we actually want to invest in growing them.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just want to make clear as well that I think the focus for us is building our own team. But in the meantime, when we had a huge backlog post the pandemic, the important thing was also to get on top of that. Hence bringing in more resource, because if you have an external organisation, they already have surveyors, they already have those people working for them, so they can then come and help us with the backlog rather than a vision, because we would be using that opportunity. So the vision is that we have more and more resource in-house. In the meantime, you need to find it where it already is, because it takes time to train those people, it takes time to develop people to have those skills and that on.
Yeah. So is the feeling that at the moment it's almost like you're in crisis because of the pandemic, but if it weren't for the pandemic backlog, would this situation not be the same? Is it literally just because of the pandemic that we seem to have people in dire need at the moment? But would you just put it down to that pandemic issue, and without the pandemic issue, we probably wouldn't have had this situation? Is that correct?
No, there have been historical issues of delays and challenges along the whole sort of pathway for adaptation, even pre-pandemic. I think what we're saying is that pandemic has exacerbated the issues around supply, around delays, around workforce, etc., etc. But there has traditionally, for many years, been challenges in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. So Councillor Incaran, and then Councillor Gotsianis, and then Councillor Peacock.
Thank you. I'm glad actually that you asked that question, because I was going to ask the same. Because we do have a resident here who's had many issues in Woodside related the pandemic. So my question here is that it's a very powerful testimony today, lived experience, and the 3 big themes are communication. I work in NHS, sadly, that's always the big cause of complaints, really. Communication, really poor communication, delays in responding, and delays in work, having shoddy work. All of those things, to be honest, you could argue you had what was issues, you are going to run into those difficulties, but with communication. I think, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, talks about hostility, Mrs. Levinson.
Yeah.
Talked about essentially hostility when you pick up a phone and to ask for help. I don't see how that is acceptable, how really that sort of behavior is acceptable. So I don't know, my simple view is there an issue? Is there an issue of culture, work culture within the council that needs addressing?
So I'm happy to answer that. So I can clearly say it is not acceptable.
That means my daughter's home. Sorry, that means my daughter's home.
Okay, it is certainly not acceptable and is something we take very seriously. I think it's fair to say that it is something corporately that the senior managers have got a significant focusing on in terms of changing the culture of that sort of customer serving resident offer. And there's something around the strong values base that we want to bring to the fore in terms of how we interact with our residents, all residents, not. I think we've highlighted the challenges within this particular area, and we know that that can lead to frustration. That is no excuse. So there is work to be done. We recognise that, and we are willing to tackle that.
Thank you. So, so just to build on some of the questions that have been asked and to sort of take them forward a little, I mean, I think what's been really valuable today is just hearing this testimony, and the themes that have emerged really have been a sort of common experience of those with certain needs experiencing a council that is sort of opaque in its operation, and in a sense, a council that is at least as perceived affronting the dignity of those who need the council's help. I think that emerged again and again is not only sort of communication issue, but also transparency issue. So the question that I've got is, do we have, and you may have put this in the report, may not have seen it, but what are the specific ways that we're going to address the transparency issue? Because that arose in terms of how, for example, the grants are funded, etc. Those decision-making processes that have taken place. Transparency, how are we going to deal with that in the next few days, weeks, months? And then, what I don't think it was an indication, and it was really reassuring me, one of the things that made me ever. And it has, and I also work in the NHS, and it has been all too easy to blame the COVID pandemic for all kinds of delays, etc. And we know that many of these issues existed way before the pandemic. And my second question is, going forward, because another looming crisis, the inflationary crisis, really, how are we as a council safeguarding ourselves from sitting here in another 2 years saying, well, it was all going to be fixed, but actually the economic crisis is coming out of plans? So that's sort of two questions.
Okay, yes,
Could I come in first and slightly on, because some of that has a slightly political slant, and then I'll open up on some more specifics. I think you're right, and actually Councillor Bevan was here. I'm sure Councillor Collins said this as well. He would say time immemorial there'll be problems in this area, and so if we solve it, you know, we'll at least a shiny badge. But seriously, I think that I think you're right. It would be wrong to just blame and say it's just about the pandemic. But what's clearly evident is there are a lot of things that couldn't take place, didn't take place well. And I had lots I was to do with my own cases, as we all were in the pandemic. That people where, you know, the surveyor comes and the next time it's another surveyor because there have been issues within that sector within the pandemic. So clearly that was us. I think your question is a good one. So what we've done this year is put in and injected a lot of funding into adult social care generally, significant amount, in recognition of some of the challenges, high demand and high need that we have. Going forward, we, as a whole council, will have seen, because I was cabinet last night, we are having to address the fact, not just inflation, but the growth in need, and Beverly said this many times before, and I'd echo it, that we also are seeing people with greater complexity. Those of you who are in the medical profession probably more familiar with it, people with more complex needs, multiple needs, some of them with long COVID, and I've said this before here. So absolutely we have to have a response to that. We don't have an answer yet, because we're doing that work now, and I think we also have to recognise that we're also in on a national environment that is not friendly, is not supportive, and has not, despite what we're told, that the solutions are all there and everything is solved. And we know that that's not true. We know that now adult social care is in crisis, the NHS has much crisis too, and that without some of those national solutions, those real solutions, we talked about workforce here, it's an issue across the NHS, it's a real issue across the whole of social care. Without someone nationally really grasping that mantle, we will continue to need to be responding to those shifting sands and be in a really challenging position. So the answer is, on a political front, we don't have that solution yet. We will have, but what we have done, and we did quite strongly, is make sure our commitment to adult social care by injecting a lot of money into the area so that we could address the fact that we have growing need, and that continues.
So just come in, thank you for the question, and I think it's a perfect one because after reviewing what I wrote down, I brought back down twice explanation of process. So it's that talking, that communication and the steps throughout it. So I know that we put it in here, but
Can I pick up on that? Sorry.
Sorry, we just have to let Vicky speak. Sorry, she has to answer the question and then I'll,
There's a process.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry, go on, Vicky.
okay. So I'd just like to get opportunity to review the process and what comms that we give to everybody on approaching from the referral back through the process. So I will go back and I'll review what that is, and I'll make changes that is supporting of the conversations we're having this evening.
Okay. So normally I finish with councillors, but Mr. Lurton, you're obviously very eager.
I am over eager, some might say, Councillor Connor.
A quick.
In fact, you keep me in that line a couple of times.
Yeah, no.
So, yeah, you put the process on slide 6 and 7, and when a DFG grant is processed, it's a year, isn't it, from approval till it's meant to be done, and it's like on that one slide, but for private landlords, there's like 11 steps. That means something needs to happen every month. And so on that process timeline, when you talked about transparency, what are the times of each of those steps? Because without that, you don't know it's starting to fall behind. And I think that needs to be communicated to us as residents, so we know where we should be in the process at this point in time, but also to staff within the organisation and those who are overseeing that process and councillors, so they know where things are falling behind. So that's my first observation. Because how do you know it's a delay until you've got a month, you're a month over the year? Well, it was a delay all the way through that process. It should have come out. So performance management, you've put on something there about performance management, but again, we don't know, apart from this 12-month deadline, we don't know what other performance markers there are on there, and particularly as residents. So the other thing I thought about in terms of communication and transparency is at each point where there is delay, knowing who to escalate to, because we wouldn't know who our people were at each stage. So, and not just a named person, but a named contact email address, a named phone number. And I prefer emails because it means there's a record of everything. We've talked about workforce, and you said that you're under complement, and it'd be interesting to know what your complement needs to be, so you know how much under complement you are and how many additional staff are needed in order to address the backlog. Because otherwise, it's how do people monitor that? How do people know that things are a problem and things aren't going to be addressed? Finally, I think Helen asked a question about duty social worker, and you said there's a named person at each stage. So you've got a named person at that stage and a named person at that stage. Who's the person to make sure you don't fall in the gap between those two stages? That doesn't seem that question wasn't really answered. Who do you escalate it to? Who's got the oversight? So yeah, just listening to what was said, they were the sort of things, and what I read in the report. I only read it while we presented. They're the sort of things that on initial reading I thought were problems in terms of transparency.
Thank you, Ms. Lurton. And Vicky, would you like to have the opportunity to?
Yes, so part of the review that we can take around that process, around the explanation of process, that will ask for some time frames to go around it, and then we will look to how that can be shared publicly and for people that refer into this area, on what we hope to achieve, because there will always be that it's unachievable. And the named person bit, I'll pick that up as well and we'll look at that process. And it is sometimes, if we outsource a particular piece of work and then it comes back in, so to pick up on your other point, we are changing our electronic system. And I know it's next year, but we're already really pushing through for that steps to be processed within the liquid logic. So that isn't unfortunately till next year, but we're already on there, working with our data colleagues to ensure this is really captured.
But if you've got a delay in each step of the process, I understand this, you need slippage between each step of the process, and we talk about the critical path and to deliver within a 12-month period. As consumers, we need to know where they are. Yeah. And that needs to be clear. And there needs to be a point where it is okay for me to say, you've reached this deadline, because you have this 2 weeks slush time, but you've just reached a critical path point where everything's going to delay at the end of 12 months. So it becomes 18 months, it becomes 2 years, so it becomes 10 years.
I can hear the sort of frustration in your voice, which is completely allowing you to make that point. But I think Vicky, you've taken that, haven't you? As I think you've been very clear about that, so that's really helpful. Thank you. I've got Councillor Peacock to come in, and then we've got one of our other guests who hasn't been able to join us up until now. So Dominic, are you able to allow one of the other guests to come in and ask a bit? If you could just let them know that they've only got a chance to ask a quick question rather than give their experience, because we're running out of time, unfortunately. Okay, Councillor Peacock.
Well, just I asked you about the phone number. I get so many complaints about people trying to phone up and they're kept on hold for such a long time. They get really frustrated and then they vent their on me and say, you know, you've got the magic wand, you can do that, you can get through, we can't get through. And eventually when I do send stuff in, it takes a long time for me to get a result, for them to respond to me. 10 days is when you've got a crisis, you need somebody to do it immediately. You don't need to wait 10 days. And the councillor there spoke about shoddy workmanship. I have been dealing with shoddy workmanship, and nobody comes around and checks to see whether the work has been done, to see if it's been done correctly. And so as I'm chair of the supported housing in the borough, so I get complaints coming to me from all over the borough, all different waters, different names. And I'm dealing with one at Palace Gates. I'm dealing with another one. I can't detail more to you, but it's a problem. It's a problem, and not everybody goes to a computer. They have to rely on the phone. And if they can't get through on the phone, what do they do? You know, when I used to be in the same ward as Councillor Bevan, it was an eye-opener going around. Point out the doors that had been fixed and not painted, or something had been done and not followed it up. And nobody seems to care. Nobody goes round to make sure that it's done properly.
Well, thank you. I think that's really clear. Vicky, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. So I would like to review the complaints we've had and any cases around people not picking the phone up. So allow me to review what the demand is and whether we've got sufficient people to pick those phones up and respond. And if not, ensure that we do.
Yeah. Can I just say one more thing, please? 684 The High Road had a fire maybe 2 years ago. The scaffolding is still up there. I've not seen anybody working on it. The lady is frustrated that lives there because she hadn't got it was all destroyed in the fire. Nobody seems to be bothering about it. And now it's not in my ward. I'm not the councillor.
And to be fair, it's probably not amazing adaptations, but I'm sure Vicky is.
684.
So your second point.
The scaffolding is still up, been up. It's cost a fortune, scaffolding.
Point well made. Thank you, Vicky.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add?
Just that your second point around that checking the work, I'd like the opportunity to review that point stage 11 that people are going out and are assessing the work when it's completed.
Sorry, could I just add to that? There's also something about also understanding where things have gone wrong.
Yeah.
At that point, kind of collating that and understanding what the learning could be. because it might be that these things are quite unique and individual, because some situations are very specialised, but there may be some consistent issues that are common to that, and there may be things that naturally, I mean, we've all had work done on our homes, we all know that there are things that go wrong. So, but collating that and understanding what that would be, so that we can then feed it into earlier in the process.
Thank you. Dominic.
Yeah, that was kind of very much to be enabling that. So,
Okay, Mr. McMorrow, did you want to ask the question? You were going to be one of the guests, but unfortunately, we've only got short time now, so please ask your question.
Good evening. The question is, my experience has been that no one in internet adoptions or home care in general have any humanity. I've never seen it that you understand why I need or we need that options. You know, when my hoist broke, I was told we'll just stay in bed, as if that was an acceptable response. You know, but yeah, thank you. I think the one thing you need to do, which would be really interesting, is if you did any cold calling. You know, there have been a number of delays. I was on the phone on Thursday. It took 45 minutes to get through to IT. When I was on the phone a few weeks ago, again, it took 50 minutes. And there was no urgency. People don't see that it's my life, if that makes sense. You see a hoist, but I see my life. Without that, I can't work. I can't operate. So, you know, it's when you have internet options, there is you go to the you go to the panel and they decide. But no one on the panel has ever been able to see me or understand why I need a particular adoption. It's all done from I suspect, financial point of view, if that makes sense. And one more point, you talked about the workforce. In your diagram, in the information pack, there was this organizational slide. All of the directors or senior managers in adult social care have the word interim in their job title. You can't get good staff if your managers are interim, because they can leave at any point. You know, you've got no faith. I've got to go my bedtime. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Yep,
That's been
thank you.
very helpful. Vicky, did you want to sort of, I know Mr. McMorrow has to leave, but obviously, you know, would you like to make any responses to the points that he's just highlighted?
So the cold call, I think it's a really good suggestion, and I will absolutely have discussions around, but let's do some of that. The telephone weights, again, it's been a theme this evening, so I have agreed that we'll review that and look at that. And if there's additional resource that's required in that area, we will absolutely ensure there is put in. The interim job title, from a workforce perspective, I'm an interim self, and I can honestly say that I see every single resident as my resident, and I'm very committed to my job. Absolutely. And, you know, there's nothing I wouldn't do. I'm sitting here tonight saying that, and the humanity part, some of us have relatives, experience that are using ourselves. So I would like to look into that piece as well, if that's okay. And the panel that we talked about, I think that potentially we could look at some service user representation and work collaboratively in a co-production way. So let's start thinking of
Can I just clarify, we've already made that offer so that users or applicants can sit on panel and be part of that discussion. It's an offer. So when there's a sort of an assessment carried out by an OT, and then there's a consideration of the options based on that sort of technical advice. Previously, it was just done by officers. There is an offer there to residents to be involved in those discussions. That has happened.
And that's the new.
And I think, in fact, what has been involved in working with us to give his lived experience of our processes and procedures so that he can influence the changes that Vicky has said. And the report reflects our in process. And if I could just make one clarification, just based on the sort of previous lived experience, just to clarify, wheelchair assessments fall under the NHS, it's Whittington Health that carries those out. So there may be something in terms of the information available to the carers in that particular example that we just need to be more explicit about in terms of, you know, it's not the local authority. Let's just be clear about it.
Okay, so
It's
that's
a
like
health.
complete miscommunication.
I think Lords is still there.
Lords.
Yeah, she's still there. But the wheelchair was Lords that raised the issue of wheelchair.
Yes, I'm just clarifying for the minutes and for the.
Okay. Well, if Lords wants to come back in on that, otherwise I know Councillor Snow, she wants to.
No, I just want to come and say, Beverly's right, actually that change of panel was because of the feedback. So we have been listening. Clearly we've got more to do, I absolutely think that. But one of the other pieces of work that we've been looking at is reviewing all the things, how we write, when we do write, how we write, and looking at communication. Because I know, because we've all experienced getting letters from a bureaucracy, whatever it is, finding that it isn't really straightforward and it doesn't help you understand what exactly is going on. Sorry, Zach. I'll stop boring. That's what I've been waiting. I was just trying to say, I want to make a comment about what the interim is, because I completely appreciate those comments and understand. We have just been through a bit, we are in a period of change. And actually, when you change structures, you do need to have an interim until you can do a full recruitment, because all of you will know the recruitment process can take many months. So appreciate these comments and how that BBC wanted to reassure the committee that is about the fact that we've just had a change. Some of you know, stuff number 11, we have looked at what the structure could be. We think it's a better structure, and then of course now we need to do that. This is the fruit. So I just want to reassure you on that point. Okay, thank you. Now I'll stop boring Zach.
No, that's fine. So I'm just going to, so as a panel, we've made some recommendations at this point. I think there's been some incredibly useful points made already. Sorry.
Go on, just ask a couple of questions.
We are very, very out of time. So if you make it incredibly quick, I will allow 2 more, but.
So just clarity, you mentioned OTs and trusted advisors. What's a trusted advisor?
I mentioned.
In the report.
Just an advisor, just an assessor.
Trusted assessor.
Yeah, so there's support for the people that can work in between. So trusted assessor, trusted advisor.
You say that residents, previous current service users are invited to share their reflections. Do you know how many residents and service users were invited?
No, I can find out for you and share that information.
Because that's something that's happened before. There's lots of numbers, but that one doesn't have a number because obviously we're not one of those. I'm just wondering how many that was. All residents currently in adaptation service have been given a named contact. Given that we've not completed our adaptations, should we have had a named contact? Okay, so that's not something that's happened. I just wonder how many others are in that situation. And then one, just around the contractors. So you issue a contract, that person then subcontracts. That's what happened for us. Like subcontract somebody who didn't assess the job properly, survey it properly, and that's where the big problems came. So it's just about how you on a framework, but it's how that's managed and monitored, that the people you're contracting to, as the lead contractor, can do the job. And they take out assistance rate, the costs.
That's right.
Well, thank you. That was the last few thick points there. Thank you for, so I take you're going to note those and come back straight to this lesson on that. Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, so as a panel, we can make recommendations. To be honest, I've had a whole lot of questions, but pretty much you've already asked them all, so that's great. So I'll go straight to recommendations. As the chair, obviously I'll make some, and then if there's any other recommendations that you think you'd like to add or you'd like to make individually, then do so. But the ones that I've noted today, I think one of the strongest recommendations, and I think you've already alluded to this, so I'm just probably speaking to what you're probably already going to do, but it's placing the personal family at the heart of the service, which I think you've already mentioned. So when the initial assessment is carried out, the person requiring the adaptation has a visit by the AT or another professional. The start of the process, that personal family remains part of that whole decision-making process around the procurement of the aids or adaptations and is actively involved in any changes or updates to this agreed provision. And I think another part to that is advocates. So I think some people have requested advocates, but only when they've known about it. So a recommendation that an advocate is offered by the council to help with the initial discussions and remain part of the process. As long as requested by the resident family member, that would just give support to that resident who may not understand what they could be asking for and what their sort of role is in this process. I think we've already had the thing about communication today, so I think very clearly what we're hearing, all communication is sent out by email or letter so that the resident or family, they have a record of this. So any developments or changes, it's very clear, there's just a record through, a clear explanation for any delays, and an opportunity for the residents and family to discuss changes with their named cases. I think that's been highlighted. Vicky, I think you might agree with that, having the named person. And in that, obviously, I think this idea of having that clear person with a phone number for that process, I think it would be really helpful. Another recommendation is that that families and residents who require aids or adaptations, I think we've really heard that they are experts in their own, experience, and they're the ones who are receiving those aids and adaptations. So that any suggestions or requests, they're treated as if it was by an equal professional person in the room. So any other person with this in there, like the OT or the physio, they have that expertise and they have that professionalism as that person receiving their aids and adaptations. So they're invited, and you said, I like the idea of being invited to the adaptations. Maybe they might need an advocate to go along in that process. I think I said to go to an adaptation if it was called, a huge panel of professionals sat around. So I think just having somebody there just to sort of explain the process, I think would be really helpful. And then that just puts that person at the heart of the decision-making process. And then I think we can really clear and confident as a council that that's really good. If there's another recommendation is that any unreasonable delay or change to any aids or adaptations, these should be discussed with the resident family member and again written in an email and the response sent out following conversations. Because I know what it's like if you're on phone. You think you've remembered what they've said. 10 minutes later, you've probably missed about 6 points and misremembered the other 6. So, it's just having that follow-up email or letter. And all suggestions by a resident or family member or any other professional around procuring a different aid or implementing a different adaptation be fully explored with everyone and again documented. So there's that thing about the district nurse with the case files, and it's all then documented and that person holds that file. So that they're, they own that process, and so that, they're really at the centre. A record is kept in the council of all delays, and I think we've already spoken to that, and the timescale agreed, and I think that's been brought up. At which point this is revisited. So, after a month, after 6 months, at what point does this trigger an alert? And then who is contacted once that alert? Does it go to yourself as head of service? Does the cabinet member get sight of it? If there are a number of alerts coming up, and what happens when that happens. Any delays over an agreed period would automatically trigger an alert. And then the final recommendation is, so that you talked about in this report, the commissioning team to look at widening their provider choices. So I think that's really helpful as well. I think there are some providers which, you know, seem to have a thing on the market and seem to hold all of them. But in other aids and adaptations, there will be other providers. But I wasn't clear from the report, although you're saying about going out to do this, it's really an understanding of how far down that process is and whether we have got other people, other providers that could step in if there are delays to accessing some particular piece of equipment, and how quickly that next provider can be contacted if the first provider cannot, for whatever reason, do it in the time frame that we as yourselves has already suggested. That's, you know, the 18 that's needed. So I think that would be really helpful. I've whipped through those recommendations. Are there anything else that you've picked up, Hal, that you think? Communication.
Some, yeah, I don't have anything. Maybe I think communication slightly distinct from transparency. It's just I think it's sort of considered the roadmap on how to improve transparency of the whole thing.
Okay, so that's that final recommendation.
I think there should be something around setting expectations. I think it's very important. I think the residents to have that dialogue, to say, look, what is feasible, to essentially prioritize what is the urgent thing that needs to be sorted out in a very timely fashion, and what can maybe wait a little bit longer. So I think that that level of expectation set between council and the residents is very, very important.
Well, I think there are a number of recommendations. Vicky, the report's really helpful, and I'm just going to make a slight ask that we get it a little bit in the future, just because I think it's really difficult for them to read and scrutinise. But thank you very much. The report was very helpful in actually getting some figures, which we've asked for, and appreciate that coming to us. And thank you to everyone, Mr. Nelson, to Beatrice and Lords and Mr. McMorrow, who came all right at the end. So thank you for your input tonight, and I hope that you actually what you asked for in recommendations, and I hope that this helps with any changes in service. And I think you've made your points very clearly this evening. So thank you everyone. Back me off. Again. Okay, so I'm actually going to have to change the agenda because one of the officers who's leading on the finance report has to leave by 8:30. So I'm actually going to change the order of the agenda, and we're going to take the finance report next. So that is agenda item number 9, finance and performance update, pages 41 to 62. We see the analysis of finance update 41, and in that pack at the end there was quite helpfully an overview on adult social care throughout each of the service areas provided. So this is it. So you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about financial update, and then we'll be able to councillors and members of the panel to ask questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, I'm Sean Wong. I am the Finance Business Partner for Adults, Health and Communities. So without further ado, looking at kind of the first page, we've got the summary revenue position. So Adults and Health is forecast to spend around 121.7 million against a budget of 112.4. What this means is there's a variance of 9.3 million overspend at Q1. Of the 9.3 million, the majority, so 7.9 million of the overspend relates to adult social care, and the remaining 1.3 million is under housing demand. I'm just going to go to the next page and go into a bit more detail of the areas of pressure. So for adult social care, the 7.9 is made up of 2.7 overspend across older peoples, 3.2 in learning difficulties, and 2.3 in mental health.
the main drivers has been kind of the substantial increase in demand and activity. So this has been kind of the legacy impact, the residual impact from COVID. We've had a lot of high cost transition clients as well as kind of high complexity clients coming onto our books. Part of the reason for this overspend is also the slippage in savings delivery. So of the 5.3 kind of combined corporate savings, I think we're doing really well, and we're delivering or projected to deliver 4.8 million of that. But when it comes to demand mitigation, I think there's been a lot of delays around those around the 4.4 million. So to kind of further on, there's also a 1 million one-off recovery of age debt, which is going to contribute to our savings. For commission and public health, we're just about break even, so a slight overspend in adults commissioning, but we're projected to spend to budget in public health. And in housing demand, there's about 1.3 million overspend at Q1. Most of this is due to loss in temporary accommodation units, and I think this has been quite a difficult market in the current climate. Moving on to the kind of financial pressures and risks. So I mentioned earlier that we're still experiencing the residual COVID impacts. This is worsening our residents' health conditions as well as the frailty. So that's causing greater activity levels and also greater complexity levels. In mental health and LD, we've also experienced an increase in the number of clients and also longer care support per client, which is costing the council more money. There's a risk also around kind of hospital discharge in terms of the amount of clients that are coming through hospital into our services, as well as the ongoing inflationary pressures, which is causing providers to come forward with substantial uplift requests. So these are all risks that are likely to pose a threat coming into the future years. I think the service is currently under a lot of pressure, and they're working to deliver the agreed savings, but also to look at any mitigations to address where there may be shortfalls in savings targets. So moving on to some of these mitigations. In learning disabilities, we're looking at the 30 top high cost clients and looking at how we can provide a suitable service, but addressing and reviewing, promoting that independence and seeing if we can step some of those clients down. Similarly, in mental health, we're also looking at the really high cost packages as well, and also to look to our health partners for additional joint funding. There's an ongoing integrated care review to look at how our whole process is working, and also looking to see if we can bring in some efficiencies, especially within transitions to long-term care. And I think finally, addressing the hospital discharge funding, we're working with our health partners to make sure that patients and clients are being put on a correct pathway, and also to look at to really give the best package and to get that support from our health partners. So moving on to our Mtfs savings tracker, I think we're doing really well in many of the areas. So within physical support, mental health, and learning disabilities, to an extent, I think we're all green and delivering to target or above target. I think where the service has a few red savings lines, those relate to some of the kind of reach targets which were put in place a couple of years ago, and I think due to the nature of the climate and the changes in modelling assumptions, some of these targets will are currently projected to slip into future years. There's also a bit of delivery and delays issues with housing demand, and I think some of which may not be feasible or deliverable. And finally, the capital report. We are projected to underspend for this financial year. So against the budget of 13.2 million, we're forecast to spend about 11 million. There have been some delays to these capital projects, and about 13.3 million of the original budget has been reprofiled into future years. So we haven't reduced the capital funding budget, we've just moved it into future years because of different timings going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Right, there's quite a lot in there. It's a small report, but actually there's an awful lot in that. So I'm going to look to my fellow councillors. So anyone want to start particularly, or should I just go around to Councillor So am I
just one time, much easier. Just Councillor Clutch.
No, I want to give you some incorrect.
Okay. So if you want to pronounce it the Tamil way, it's Eingeren.
Eingeren. Right.
Probably easy. Eingeren.
I will go that way. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. Can I come to the capital report? And I want to pick up a couple of things here, or maybe one in particular, the social, emotional, and mental health provision. Even there, you've not spent any money. Is that a project that is delayed or?
George, yeah. Oh, sorry, Jill. Sorry, we're looking at. Sorry, yeah, I'm just.
Thank you for the question. That capital budget was identified to improve the services on a kind of bespoke basis. But since it was developed, we've done some different thinking about how we want to approach that. So it hasn't been used because we haven't used it, we haven't needed to. So what we're looking at for future years, and we're doing the capital bids at the moment, is how to redefine what that actually is. So it was originally a mixture of children's and adults prisons, and now that the department has changed, we're looking at children's commissioning and its projects separately. As such, we haven't spent the money. As Sean mentioned, the question for us about whether it's reprofiled or whether new bids are needed to describe what we do with that.
Could I have another? Thank you so much. So the other is something relevant to us on the wood side, obviously, the canning present. So I'm just wondering, I still see a lot of scaffolding, and I see the opening was during the summer, but it's delayed. It's not clear to me when that is going to open, and I can see you clearly spent money, but not all of the money. So I'm just wondering where we are with that project.
Thank you for the question. In the update that I submitted, that will now open in October. So this, I'm sure you're aware, there's been a range of challenges to the construction industry over the last 12 months, and it's caused a number of delays in workforce and supplies, etc. Scaffolding is up because the work is still ongoing, but we are due to open in October, and that's at the moment we believe that will
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to talk about discharge. Yes, look at that big smile. I don't quite understand what it's saying here about ensuring cases discharged from hospital are appropriate. Seems a very strange thing to say, and via the correct pathway. I mean, I'm just thinking that you're going to have a hell of a lot more pressure with this new, and I just want to understand what is appropriate and what isn't. Surely you have been doing appropriate things before.
We would like to think so. This area, there are challenges. So we do know pathways according to where people are discharged to. whether they can discharge home, for example, without any follow-up, and some people are quite lucky in that, they can just go straight home from hospital. Whether they need to go home with some support at home, whether that's reablement, it's a up to 6-week package, whether they need to go into more supported sort of rehabilitation or reablement that is bed-based, that's a different pathway, whether they need to go into what used to be called that sort of NHS convalescence, we just call it rehabilitation now, where the NHS really supports that kind of more in-depth need, or whether they actually need to go into a nursing home or residential provision. So I think it's fair to say that when in the throes of COVID, things, the NHS in terms of working together with local authority put together a number of sort of step-down facilities or beds to facilitate that throughput of flow from the hospital. And that challenge still continues in terms of the impact, both on the social care budget and obviously for the NHS. So what we want to do is to work with the NHS to make sure that people actually, we look to ask them what their choice is, and we have this thing called home first model. And a lot of people actually say, we want to go home, we want the support wrapped around us at home. That's not always possible, of course. Where people sometimes go directly into residential or nursing provision, sometimes is that the right decision for them? It tends to be a higher cost care. If we can step people down where we can have multidisciplinary, multi-therapeutic input to improve their sort of independent living skills, very often they don't need that sort of high cost care. But it's fair to say that during COVID, just because of that rapid discharge, analysis shows that we could probably do things better.
So if I can just,
does that kind of make sense?
well, I hear you. However, I'm a bit concerned that you're going to have a lot of people that are not going to go where they would like to go because you haven't got the workforce. And we're back to workforce again, because you need workforce to do this. So what's the mitigation? I mean, it's saying that it's going to have an impact on finance, but I think it's going to have a far larger impact than we're seeing here, because you're going to need the workforce.
So just to deal with the finance aspect. So if first, because this is, first and foremost a finance report. If, for example, the local authority picks up and supports cases and pays for cases, that should really be helped. We need to sort that out. So that's part of that's very much where Vicky is very much involved in terms of making sure that although the support's going in is paid for by the right body, as it were, the NHS or the local authority. And you're probably aware that intermediate care as a whole can continue, and I don't have to go into that with you. And during COVID, I think you probably recall that there was some policy changes in terms of choice for people in hospitals that were what's the word, changed just to support rapid discharge, which then meant, the consultants are shaking their nodding their heads, meant that people didn't always get the choice that they wanted. And you've got to put that into the bigger context of the pressures that hospitals were under during COVID. So there were lots of changes, which meant that very often people, yes, didn't get the choice that they wanted in terms of their discharge.
I suppose lastly, how long is it going to take? Because it sounds very much as if you're in an interim stage here with discharge. Yeah. How long is it going to take to reach that? Well, we're okay with discharge now, we're happy.
Oh, wow. I'm not even sure I can begin to answer.
We should have you could answer that. We've got fun love.
So while we are sat here this evening, I think practically everyone else looking across NCL is in Open 4, and we are working frantically to ensure that every resident has choice of where they want to go. that meets those needs. But we are bringing far more people through. You'll see from the scrutiny report, we're getting to over 200 referrals a month. So that's a significant increase. Now, the work that they are doing is really intensive, and it's that wraparound, perhaps providing a higher level. So we've got physio, occupational therapists, social work intervention, and private care providers. So that we can get people to their optimum, but to be able to do that, there is a higher financial cost to it, but it still is where they want to be. So it's that resident's voice and getting people back to the community. So it is costing us more at the moment. However, we are reviewing that service across NTL, our intermediate care services, which is Pathway 1, straight from home. Pathway 2 is our intermediate care bed services, and I visited them today, but we're also doing a review of NCL Pathway 2 as well, to make sure that we have got absolutely the right level of resource to meet the demands. And we probably won't have for winter, because I know winter happens every year, but as an NHS system, you know, the throughput, the acuity and demand that is on those services is really extreme. But we have to meet that demand, so it does put financial pressure on us.
Thank you. We've got very little time left, so can I just ask, sorry, Councillor Zed, can you be really succinct at this point, because we've still got quite a lot of questions to go.
I will be.
Thank you.
Well, Helen has just hit the nail on the head around the challenges we face. Many of them not our own making. That increased demand that we're talking about, and that increased challenge, that seeing people also be blunt within the NHS system, perhaps deconditioning more than they used to, not getting the support, not seeing an OT all the time they're in hospital. All that is a huge knock-on effect. And workforce, I can honestly say to you, Helen, that's what we're talking about all the time in all our conversations about the borough partnership. And for me personally, I think the challenge for us is how we mobilise a workforce that's having to get based, how we provide good local jobs, but in a context in which, let's be blunt, be political. There is no one sort of really looking at this in a way that can, in anyhow, rescue it. So Vicky, rather, is working really hard, but I think you are right. There are big challenges, and we're not alone in that. Every local authority in London, and in fact across the country, are probably sitting, quite a lot of them tonight in meetings like this, having the same conversations. Very challenging.
Thank you. Councillor Gautier?
Yes, I appreciate just a brief sort of additional clarification, maybe from my own understanding of the on page 43, with regards to the temporary accommodation overspend, how that's going up despite those living in temporary accommodation going down. And then again, the fact that the HPG is or should be done with that, so that yet it is just a little bit. It might be a really silly question.
No, it's not a silly question. Again, as to echo colleagues have said, I imagine there are people like me sitting in meetings like this who are at the moment talking about the supply of temporary accommodation across the board. And I'm speaking, I should say, I'm speaking on behalf of my colleague Denise Gandy, who actually manages this area, but she's not. There has been huge supply challenges across the city and indeed across the country. Many boroughs, including our own, needing to use bed and breakfast in the form of temporary accommodation for the first time in many years, which is a combination of challenges. We're really pleased and proud of the quantity of work that we do around homelessness, which is why those numbers are coming down. Other routes to prevent homes space, or to leave temporary accommodation by the private rented sector or the new council homes that we're building. But the cost is increasing significantly because the supply is significant. Every unit cost every week is costing us more now than it, which is why you're seeing HPG, which is called the Homelessness Prevention Grant, is a grant that councils receive in response to a variety of different burdens that we experience, both through changes in having pressures and for the ongoing prevention work that we do. That prevention grant that we receive is about £8 million a year. It funds a range of projects and initiatives that look at homelessness prevention and also relief. One of the things it also does is addresses what's called the TA subsidy. So it means where the rents and the service charges of temporary accommodation exceed the local housing allowance, you don't get that money back, so we have to pay that ourselves. So as that increases, the HPG has to manage that. So I can see once it goes in, it means that budget is important. HBG is being reviewed by central government at the moment, and Harringay, who are one of the current biggest beneficiaries of the HBG, stand to lose potentially across 40% of the pounds that we receive.
Thank you. That's I've got a couple of questions. So obviously, Sean spoke to the adverse variance of 2 million on the overspend at Q1. Sean, we have conversations with you every year, or you know, around overspend. How confident are you, considering the risks which you've very clearly highlighted in this document around, you know, all the pressures that adults health is facing due to high needs and, you know, high costs for different services? How confident are you that this overspend can be brought down, or are you saying that this is actually the spend that is necessary in order to provide the services that our residents are currently need and are being assessed for?
Should I come in first, Sean, and then you come in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Hello, hiya. I think this particular outturn figure does factor in the mitigations that are currently in place. So it is an end of year position. So we have kind of considered all the pressures that the department, you know, is facing. In terms of the risk, obviously we're unable to put everything in the forecast. You know, some of those things just might not transpire, and obviously through the course of the year, mitigations might be found in conjunction with, you know, service colleagues in the room to try and address them. So it will be, I'd say, it would be unwise to put it in the forecast right now until we kind of do further work, I'd say, Chair. So at this point in time, the current forecast position or outturn is considering all things that we think might occur by the end of the financial year. Is there anything you want to add, Sean, to that?
Yeah, just about thanks. I think you asked most of the points. I think Chair asked something around is this how much we need to spend to ensure that, you know, we're meeting our services. I mean, I can only answer for a kind of from a finance perspective. I think the service can talk to a lot more than I can, but I think yeah, we've seen a lot of demand coming through, and just to echo what we've said in previous points, it's not just Harringay that's seeing this huge increase. There's, I know for a fact, across London, several, you know, the majority of boroughs are in an overspent position. So yeah, the demand is really there. Thanks.
Sorry, just also. Yeah, sorry, just also to add, yes, I think other local authorities are experiencing it, but also just to kind of recognise that there are some kind of significant savings targets in which the department is required to deliver upon as well. So, you know, the starting position and where we are compared to others might be slightly different as well.
Thank you both. Sorry, Becky, did you say?
Thanks. The only thing I wanted to add, they're absolutely correct, but obviously there is the onus is on officers to look to see where we can have alternative mitigations for the ones that are clear that are not working. So the demand mitigations that Sean highlighted that were not working because all our assumptions are blown up with COVID means that we're working to put forward alternative mitigations.
Okay.
But as we speak.
That leads me very nicely on to my second question, Beverly. It's the mitigations that you've mentioned on page 45. So there were a number of mitigations that sort of have been highlighted sort of you know, very briefly, and I'm just wondering, is there something in the report that sort of fleshes these out a bit, or are these things that you're looking to develop because you've got transport arrangements, daycare commitments, high cost placements for mental health, the reablement of transition packages within integrated care, reablement, and then I've got some end of service. So there's quite a lot of words that would naturally trigger like, oh, what's that? And probably like a 20-minute conversation. But so I'm just asking, is this something that's just very high level at the moment and we're just beginning, or is this
It's very high level, just
right? Okay.
Is it too long? No problem.
Thank you. That's a peacock.
And obviously, as the year progresses, we can add to that, but it's really a bit of a deep dive into areas we need to look at that we feel there would be some opportunity.
So the final question I have is obviously around the savings. So I know Sean mentioned that some savings are no longer going to be taken forward just because of the length of time and, you know, and things have changed. I know you say that the savings are being currently delivered on, but there's obviously needing to be either more savings or another way of bringing down the spend that the overspend that we're currently looking at. So just around that whole process, at what point are we able to sort of see a little bit more in depth around your I'm assuming these will probably be new sort of saving proposals. Are they coming up for the, is this for this year's budget in December, or is this something that's?
We're working on them as we speak, and as I think we said earlier, we looked at originally identified savings, and as you know, some were carried forward from last year. And the ones that were based on demand mitigations, we just sort of said, there's not a high possibility that we're going to deliver them. So we'll look for alternatives, and you've just summarised the high level areas that we're looking at in terms of alternatives. And where we sit now, we think that we can start to deliver on some of those this year, but also in future years.
Okay, thank you.
So that's as much as I can
know.
say.
Just for the panel to understand sort of time frame. So we'll get this as part of the budget for this year, or some of those that will have been brought forward. That will be parts potentially of the package that we'll be looking at for this year.
So we continuously drive to bring down the in-year pressures. So we would want some to be delivered this year. I think it's too early for me to say as I sit here, because we're just looking at a range of options, what that might look like. But I think the approach we're taking is clear that if they're not delivered this year, then there's a higher opportunity next year and the following year.
I just unpick that last sentence. What does that mean? A higher opportunity?
So sometimes it takes time. So we've got 6 months of the year left. So even if we start the activity now, it may not, significant amounts may not be reducing this year, right? But then following year and the following year, so over a 2.5 year period. That's basically what I'm saying.
Thank you. So I think one little quick question that's come up from that last comment is I completely understand about the difficulties in trying to bring down a budget when you've got such high needs and high pressures. I think I'm going back to that first question that I posed to Sean and then Josephine was around this is the 7.9 million overspend at the moment, and looking at the chart for mitigations, are we as a council thinking we are going to have to put more into the budget into adults and health in the short term, and maybe these savings may be sort of begun at the moment, but will be happening later down the line in the next year, the year after. I'm just sort of trying to work out about this, the overspend. Are you looking to significantly be able to bring that down? Or are you saying actually that we might need some bit more funding into adults and health this year in order to offset the overspend that we're currently seeing in Q1?
So I'll ask finance colleagues to answer that, but the budget is set at the beginning of the year. I don't expect additional money to be parachuted in mid-year. I would expect our activities to continue to try and reduce that projected spend. But at the same time, there's parallel activity about growth and what we think, given the complexity of need, the demographics of the population, might be needed for next year. So those are all active processes that we're thinking about at this present time.
Okay, thank you, Beverly. Sean, anything to add to that, or are you?
Also, just I think just to add to Beverly's point, it is something that would have to be kind of addressed in year. I don't think there's any kind of money available to add growth in year. The expectation would be to drive costs down during the year, but also it is, you know, the pressures that adult social care is facing is in my opinion, a corporate issue. And so I would expect other departments have been asked to also drive down their cost to support the kind of council's bottom line position. So I think all departments are expected to address their spend as well to help the overall bottom line.
Okay, thank you, Josephine. Okay, sorry.
Very good question. So this one's to, so the way you've laid out your summary revenue position is just for the quarter. Is that not a way of showing what it was this time last year? But do we not get historical?
We can have historical figures.
Because it'd just be useful to know like what it was this quarter last year, the position.
Yes, I'd like to be able to say I could do that from memory, either Sean or Josephine, but I can't. So, do either of you remember what we were at bottom on last year on this position?
Unfortunately, not at 8:30 at night. But what I could say is that, you know, it is good to compare with last year, but we all know that things do change. Other pressures do come about, you know, in the following year. But it's something that definitely we can provide at a future scrutiny if that's what's requested.
I think that was it. I think you're saying that actually if you had that, you know, that tracking, then it would be helpful for us to know whether this is very different and very, you know, or if last year at quarter one we were 4 million.
Yeah.
Just more meaningful for me.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. Okay, any other questions on budget? No, in which case, thank you very much for the report on budget. And I look forward to the reports on budget, finance, risk and performance before. Sorry. Oh, apologies, Councillor Brennan. Sorry, we didn't see it. Well, I didn't see it there. Luckily, Dominic did. He's just gonna.
You're on mute again. Councillor Brennan, you're on mute. Can't hear you.
Okay, sorry, I snuck my hand in at the last minute and then I didn't unmute myself. So my understanding is that because I really didn't like this look of mitigating the cost, because I was thinking in people's terms, so it feels like mitigating the cost is like is not giving such good service for people in need. But my understanding from what you've said is that one way of mitigating the cost will be to provide home service for people rather than putting them into expensive daycare places, because that's actually what people want. Is that one of the things that you were suggesting that would save money for the service? Is that right?
No, not at all. Sorry. Sorry if that wasn't made clear. It's not about restricting choice. It's about looking at.
Well, so sorry, you didn't understand me then. I said, I understood that you were going to provide what people want, which is not restricting choice, is actually giving them what they want, because most people will want to go home and a lot of people will not want to go into highly expensive care homes. So therefore you will save money at the same time as providing people with what they want, which is actually to go into their own homes. And that would save the service money. That was my understanding. Is that wrong?
Sorry, no, that's sorry, it's my brain not computing well. So I think when we're talking about trying to look to see which agency should pay for the proportion of the support the individuals, it's very much about, is it health, is it local authority? And it's not about restricting choice on the individual. So just to clarify, you're absolutely right, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I was saying the opposite. I was just saying that presumably if people want to go home and you can provide in-home service, that will be cheaper naturally than paying, because we haven't got a lot of care homes in Haringey that are that you have to pay for care homes. So that will save the service money. If people want to go home and if we can provide the service to enable people to stay home, that was how I was thinking you were mitigating spending so much money.
part of this is probably a little bit more complex than that, because in order for people to stay at home and improve, they need certain interventions. So if we don't have those interventions in the community, actually they're going to deteriorate. So that's not a good option for them. So what we have to work with together through our integrated system is to make sure, and we talked about workforce, shortages of therapists, physios, and all of that. We've got to come together to make sure that we can maintain people appropriately at home and not just put them at home for the sake of being at home, because otherwise they could decline. It's a little bit more complicated.
But if it's what they want, and if you can provide it, it is the best solution, and it will save us money.
Absolutely. Okay, right. I'm going to have to draw this item to a close, because otherwise we're never going to get to our third agenda item. But thank you very much. I'm just going to make sure there's no further questions. Excellent. Right. Okay. So we're moving on to the final agenda item, which is agenda item 8, which is the Living Through Lockdown report. It's in the supplementary pack. Starts on page 19 in the pack. Oh no, so it's in the main pack is the old report that we had originally over the last couple of years, and then the actual update, which is the response to next steps, is actual supplementary pack, which is under the major adaptations from page 19.
Just today.
Yes, we only got this today, so I apologize to ask for a look. But really, yes, so it's that next step. So we've had an update in March 22. We're now looking at September just to based on what we've seen. So I'm looking to Jill to do the report. Jill, we haven't got a huge amount of time for this. I'm really sorry. If you could just, I think what I'm really just with this through the process is really as part of this. Are there any service changes or policy changes that you can sort of identify and draw out for us as councillors that have resulted from the work that's been done with the Joint Partnership Board? I think really that for me is quite key, but I'll over to you to sort of introduce the report.
And firstly, the apology is mine for the late report.
Okay, I'll see you in the morning. Yeah.
It's really helpful in my new role to read this report and think through what the change has been. And I guess the important thing to say is that this report and what's followed is very much the context of the recovery from the iterative and ongoing all the time. And I'm not sure that there'll ever be an end for this time. And one of the things that was really helpful in speaking to your question, there was all of the changes that have happened, starts to happen, and how we can see maybe they are linked to the work of the Joint Partnership Board and set here. So a few key examples to keep it short, I would say the council's response and commitment around co-production has really strengthened over the last few months in particular. We've recruited and the person has started a new participation lead whose role it is to think about the council's co-production work. I also have been really pleased in the first few months of my role to start conversations with the Joint Partnership Board on how we can do some of that more together. I think co-production is a really clear improvement and something that we want to do. The other thing that I would really want to speak to and that was really strong in the report was around digital inclusion. So COVID offered, in some respects, an opportunity for the council and its partners to do more digital work and to think about how we digitalise our services, but also at the same time balancing that with still maintaining face-to-face services for people. Only this morning we were speaking as the leadership team about our digital transformation work and how that needs to be resident-facing. I think a lot of what is coming out in the report really directly, you can see that thread through that. So I think there's a lot in the digital space that we'll start to see. But to kind of balance that, I think our localities work is something which has also really emerged and grown over the last 6 months. And that is that kind of balance between what is digital, what is face-to-face, and how can that be closer to residents, as opposed to just in the civic centres of the boroughs. Really thinking about getting up into the community. And we all learned in COVID about the importance of our neighbourhoods as a place to the whole world. And the final thing that I would want to draw out is the food strategy. And we started work looking at food strategy. And that's built from all of the work around the development of the food network during the pandemic. And I think it's really important to hear some of the points that are made around how food provision is enabled, particularly for very vulnerable, thinking about different dietary needs and different relationships to food. Thinking about at the moment, it's also how do we encourage, again, at that neighbourhood level, people to come together around food. So I think I'm particularly keen in thinking how the Joint Partnership Board can support that. If you want conversations, we might be and not just having a universal. I won't go on, but I'm very happy to provide any written updates if it's useful.
Thank you, Jim. I'm just going to say, Helena, do you want to declare an interest at this point?
Oh, no. Yes, I have to declare that I'm co-chair of the Joint Partnership Board, so I have a very big interest in this. And I can say that it's finally that Jill's now there, we are moving forward. I mean, we had a period of things not happening, but because of the structure that's going to be in place and the fact that we're going to report back to here annually, I think that's actually cheered the members of the reference groups up a lot. I mean, you may find it difficult, but they feel that they're being listened to and that there's somewhere to go. So I'm really pleased, and it's going to make us work harder. Always a good thing. Don't you laugh, would you? The other thing is that as Joint Partnership Board, we're also finding that we're going to have to change the way we work, and we're actually going to get together, I hope soon. I don't think we've got a date, have we?
It's this week, so I think it's possibly the middle of October. I'll have a look.
Right. So we are going to meet together to see how we can produce, how we move forward, how we involve the Joint Partnership Board far more. So I can say I'm feeling far more positive in March.
Excellent. That's good to hear because you're the voice on the ground. So we do rely on your insight into this. So thanks, Helena. Are there any other questions from councillors specifically on the different areas that have been brought up?
I appreciate the March updates. I mean, obviously, probably they some.
That's your March ones. That's your September ones.
They
No, it's hard to do a quick, but I appreciate that.
Great. Yeah,
It's a lot.
I was working all day. It's all. Yeah. So yeah, it's really good.
Housing and sheltered accommodation, you talk about provision of PPE. But I'm concerned about, what's it called, when you have a heart attack or something? Yes. It's a lot of council buildings haven't got that equipment. If it was already, they
I don't know about the best thing. I can take that as a question.
I think it's really necessary.
Any trained operatives?
Yeah, just supposed to talk you through it.
Most of them now are.
I'm not
supposed to be.
It's very expensive and that's the reason why
It used to be very expensive, because it used to, with the machine and how it was set up, used to require trained people, but now they kind of come in a box. So I don't think it's a cost issue. So I'll check and find out.
Yeah, so it's nothing really, particularly in sheltered schemes where you've got very vulnerable people.
I had a couple of questions. I've got, it said, I'm just looking at what page number this was. I've got, given the COVID advice during the first and second lockdowns, day centres remain closed. And then there's a recognition from the council as caused an additional strain on carers. And obviously, but given the public health advice, it was unavoidable. So there's two questions really for this. So what learning has taken place, and are there any different service provisions that we may potentially be looking at in case there is any future issues around COVID? I mean, is there sort of, I suppose it's learning from, and I think we were discussing this earlier, is there any learning from what happened? And I did note in one of the updates that it did mention that most of the provision in care homes about people being allowed back in again has sort of gone back to normal, but it did say most rather than all. Is there any way, I know care homes aren't, they're private providers, but is there any way that we as a council can sort of have that conversation with them to ensure that relatives can sort of get in and speak?
I can answer a bit and
Yeah, thank you.
as well. One of the reason why that's said largely, I think, was because obviously where there are still people that are shielding, there are still measures in place around the specific infection. Also on a case by case basis, there might be people whose visitors are no longer visiting them the same way as they were pre-COVID. That isn't to say that there's just been a significant shift in a lot of environments, not only care homes, also around people that are particularly vulnerable. So there are some visitors policies, for example, that are slightly shifted to make space for that, which I think is actually a positive development. So, reference rather than a blanket thing.
I've been to a couple of care homes today, and both were still wearing masks, which I was quite pleased to see that staff were wearing masks and protecting residents. But conversations led to the CQC standards and what's in at present. So relatives and visitors are allowed into care homes, but there may be some differences. For example, if somebody's got an outbreak of 2 or more, then can be restricted to 1. At the moment, it is going to change next month. And I have to say, with winter coming and potentially not sure which direction it's going to go in, it could at any point go back. They are trying to ensure that at least one named person can go in to a care home when there's loved ones there, so that it's not gone back to what was in the height of COVID.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Vicky. That's really helpful. And thank you, Jill, for that.
Sorry, could I just ask, do you have influence on? I'm not sure, because it worries me, this named person. That named person can't go. Why can't their spouse or daughter, or it seems to me it shouldn't be just one person. And I wonder whether that's something you can influence.
So if somebody's got an outbreak, it used to be that nobody could go, and they name the person that's nearest to them. So that work does happen with the family member. The family members do make a recommendation on what person it could be, but it's only for a small period of time. So outbreaks, when it would be in that case, it's only gone down to, I think it's 10 or 14 days, depending. So it's not for a long period of time, it's for a short period of time until the infection is clear and a series of events have happened to enable more residents to have families visit. So it's short term. And if a care home is over 3 floors, they can do it by floor. They don't have to do it throughout.
If it's over 3 floors?
Yeah, so if we've got 3 floors to a particular care home and the outbreak's in the middle floor, it's the middle floor that might be affected. They don't have to affect, whereas previously it was the care home in its entirety.
Thank you. On mental health and wellbeing on point 2 around the bereavement counselling specific to those with learning difficulties, I was just wondering, it mentions that this was the service. I was just wondering, do we know how many people access this counselling service and whether this was found to be useful?
I don't know the answer.
Thank you. And I think on page 25 on point 6, inter-service referrals, yes. It said mental health services should be able to refer people to other services for extra support. How are we measuring this to see if this is actually happening?
We're not measuring it specifically.
Okay.
There's a reason for that, which is it tends to shift activity if you start measuring something. We don't want people just making referrals for the sake of it. One of the things that is happening at the moment in terms of our relationship with the development ICF and ICB and our ongoing relationship with the hospital trust is thinking about the multidisciplinary teams around, making sure that people are able to understand that the right services are the right times. So doing some work at the moment across the partnership between ourselves and looking at what our relationships are with teams on the ground. So how our teams actually don't have to make referrals because they're in the same place, instead of there needing to always be this paperwork trail.
Okay.
And there's another approach which Vicky mentioned around hazard assessment as well. So we're looking at how do we embed trusted assessors, so people in one team that can also assess for another team, or are trusted in that process. So again, we can basically, I would say, working in small areas rather
Yes.
than develop.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting to know. And oh yes, personal budgets and assistance. Now, this has actually been on the news nationally recently about the lack of personal assistance. And on page 29 on point 4, you were saying about the orders to increase the capacity being commissioned by the council through DAH. I was wondering if any sorry, yes, has any actually been or we know there?
I only know an update from some time ago, and I don't know what capacity you know now. But
we can come back.
Yes, it might be absolutely.
No, that's fine, thank you. Oh yeah, e-consultation. So and NHS and care provision. So this is NHS colleagues, and so obviously I'm happy to have this talk about. Page 30.9, understand e-consultations. We've been talking about this before about DP access. Do we are we collecting statistics on the success and failure of e-consultations? So are we understanding our residents in Haringey, if they're happy contacting their GP as the primary care or secondary care services by e-consultations?
I don't think that the specifics, the gathering that you're at the recommended to take. However, that was the response from. I'll take that.
Thank you. Any other people?
Well, it's one of our the same question.
Did you?
Just because obviously comes up, and I understand some practices have technology which even allows them to know when someone puts the phone down, etc. So there are some practices that have quite good data on how these things track to, and others less so. So quite interesting.
So it's a mixed picture.
We'll let her come back.
No, I'll come back on that. Okay, no, that's very good. And the last point on page 31.12, sharing future plans, information should be shared with the Joint Partnership Board on the strategy and vision for, by the way, vision for opticians. I thought that was and dentists in the new normal, because we've just done on JOST about the lack of NHS dentists for vision, and it's really concerning us in the JOST, which is the it's the NCL. So how is that able to be happening? Is that something?
That's also a question I'll have
Yes.
to Rachel.
Excellent.
Writing.
Okay, thank you.
Haven't heard yet. No. Could I come to class if you don't mind? The page 27. Couple of points. I just want to ask the challenge maybe. Keep toilets open. Do you have data in terms of all the toilets in all of the parks open, or how many of the toilets are functioning?
Or how many parks have got toilets?
That's all good. Is there any data?
I don't have it available.
I think it's useful for us to have that data actually. I think it's quite useful for residents. And the next one is make parks safer. What do you mention?
So one of the ways that we measure that is through our engagement work with residents. So an example might be there's been extensive consultation around the Finsbury Park, and particularly thinking about travelling through the park at night because it's the gate's not locked. So there's been a lot of conversation with different user groups around their sense of safety in the park, what makes them feel safe, what doesn't. So rather than it being quantitative data, it's often much more qualitative experiences. Particular in Finsbury Park, for example, thinking about the experiences of women in the park because of the traffic death that we had several years ago, and in Parks and Green Spaces strategy, which is about the population, speaks a lot to that idea of safety, and a lot of the kind of engagement work is there.
Better add something here, because Finsbury Park, I mean, is, you know, it's a huge park, but there are an awful lot of smaller parks, and the feedback we're getting is it's not good that you're not locking them up. There's nobody going round and locking. So what you get is antisocial behaviour in these parks late at night. Well, even not late at night, but when it's dark. So I'm going to feed that back. It's not just about Finsbury Park, it's about your local park right near you.
Okay. excellent, thanks.
Did I just start, doesn't it?
Well,
Started
yes, it started it. And councillor
Yes, it's those people again.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, just because of time, unfortunately, we have run out of time on this. But I'm just going to make a recommendation for the next report, if that's all right. Because obviously there's going to be this increased working with the Joint Partnership Board with this new co-production. And I'm just wondering, just really to be able to give us a bit more sort of depth. I think sometimes it's helpful to have it in sort of little snippets, but I think if we took mental health and wellbeing as a whole, and then you brought out the new or the changes or the new initiatives, because actually you have this evening, and that's really interesting for us. But I think it's sometimes lost in this sort of the way that the report is. So I don't know. I mean, obviously that's for you both to discuss in your, how this happens. But I think just from Scrutiny's perspective, I think what we're looking for is the changes, the different policies, how that's impacted service provision. Actually, if there's a problem with financing that, talk about staffing in parks, what are those risks? What are those? And that's the bit that we can then sort of scrutinise. Is that okay, Jill? Thank you. That would be really helpful.
So my question to you,
yes,
is when are you expecting the annual review from Joint Partnership Board and Social? Because I don't understand at which point we've been going for a while. When's the adult safeguarding report? When are you expecting this one?
So we've taken it really 6 monthly, haven't we? We did March and now we've done September. So
March again.
Well, that's another 6 months. So it might, if it's an annual, if you're by definition looking at September.
Okay.
But if there's an update that you want to feed back to us as a panel from the Joint Partnership Board perspective, and you want us to take it any earlier, of course we can take that under advisement.
I need to talk again.
Yes. And I think for the next iteration in September, and obviously the year's time, if this is the new beginning, actually it probably will take a while to embed in this new co-production way of working. So I think as long as the panel's happy with that and it's an annual report back, I think September would be a good time to put it in to our agenda. Okay, so thank you very much. And thank you everyone. And as I said, reports a little bit early. Future, just because not everyone can sit there and just get through it all today, so that would be really helpful. Thank you. Just our sanity and be able to scrutinise it properly. But that's it. I'm afraid you're not going. We've got the work programme to go on, but thank you, everyone.
We need to go to bed.
No, we should. It's a long day.
I know. I think that's that.
Okay.
Tomorrow. So you're coming to the Scrutiny?
Work programme. You want to give us a quick update on where you think we are and the new areas that we've got on our agenda.
Yes, I don't have a work programme in front of me, but agenda in front of me is right. But I think there were suggestions about possible new items last time, provision of dementia services and so on. And that's really included in the work programme. But we have got the Scrutiny Cafe tomorrow morning, so we can continue to start those on the next floor. What we want to do, added the update report on integrated partnership working to the March 2023 meeting. And so the joint insurance company is in February. So that's what we have now. And yes, obviously the thing we need to decide actually is the reviews, and we'll be set by, I think there was a conversation earlier on, and then obviously we'll have a conversation at Scrutiny Cafe as well.
So thank you, Dominic. And so the meeting in the 17th of November, we've got apparently said running towards board. And we had specific requests earlier. I'll link you into that, so I've written it down somewhere.
Just to say, I've been in touch with Dr. Cooper about the Safeguarding Adults Board report, so that's confirmed. That's in the diary for November. And I think the other points about CQC update that's on there, we're having a agenda planning meeting, and I think about a week and a half with directors, so we'll explore that in that meeting and just get that
They all remember what Anne was asking for as part of the I notes quickly. Was it safeguarding? So there was a request earlier from one of the councillors around for Dr. Eddie Cooper's report. Could we also request that there's an update on the safeguarding process that's undertaken for women and children coming into the UK and staying within people's homes, and just so we can understand the process, because I think there was a brief update given on the children's panel, but a slightly more detailed response I think was requested on how that process is undertaken and how concerns are raised, etc. So if you could mention that to Dr. Eddie Cooper.
Said about the funding fishing this month.
Yes, so there's a 6-month period of funding for Ukraine coming out.
Just to say this is specifically the Ukraine.
Yes, yes.
Not specifically in the 6 month.
No, that's, yes, this is a
I think
different.
she said it's up now.
So I think it depends when people came over, because it's 6 months from that moment, but you're right, it is still 6 months.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to request that. So we've got those two, so we've got one slot for the November panel. We have got sort of other ones that we've got on ours. We've got dementia services, about dementia services across the borough, preparedness for possible future pandemic, the Irish Centre, redevelopment of the former Irish Centre and the Grace Organisation. And how that's fitting together, and then the community mental health model and suicide prevention, and potentially we've got something on domestic violence, depending on the questions we get back. So there was a request earlier from Councillor Peacock. I think you've taken that, Dominic, haven't you? Okay, around the information requested. So that any of those could be slotted into November, or anything that comes up from the Scrutiny Cafe tomorrow. And then December's budget, so that's it. There's nothing but budget on that. And then February we've got 2 slots. Oh no, sorry, that's the joint meeting. That's the extra meeting. So that's the strong transition. And then we've only got 1 more slot on the 13th of March. So actually we've only got 2 more slots to fill, and the panel's project.
I've been doing a lot of work with the dementia services with people with dementia. You know, all through COVID, I walked a person with dementia every day. Yeah, that's it. And I was saying earlier on, we don't seem to provide very much in the borough. And now he goes to Barnet for help.
So this has been a concern, I think, over a couple of years now. I think different panels have looked at dementia and have been concerned, especially in the east of the borough, about the provision. And I think the challenge that we've put forward as a panel is that we've had centres of excellence in the west, but we haven't got that. Well, we haven't got that as a recognised centre of excellence in the east. Now, I don't know what's happening with the Grace Organisation, because I know they're supposed to be doing some dementia services provision within that. But Dominic, could we ask around the dementia services, could we ask officers what's happening with the Grace Organisation and dementia? Because I noted in one of the reports they mentioned the Grace Centre was going to be providing dementia services. Can we ask them how that?
Have you been there?
Well, not to the new Irish Centre, but
the old one.
Yes.
So very heavily based on religion.
Right, okay, so we'll just see really a bit of an update, because actually that might be an agenda item that because dementia, I think this service provision, I think, is a significant concern for people across the borough. Okay, so we won't add anything else into the work programme at the moment. We'll wait to see what comes back from the Scrutiny Cafe, but just to highlight that those are the areas. And for the project, we've got some couple of ideas from our earlier discussions, but we'll also wait to see what happens from the Scrutiny Cafe tomorrow as well. And with that, if there's any other further questions? No any other urgent items of business? No, excellent. Then let's close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. And see some of you tomorrow.
Yes, I will be there.
Well, not
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. I'm sorry I couldn't come to I was still at work. Was there anything that you wanted to?